All of us, one way or another, have had the same journey. Even if the details of your life are different than mine, and every single person has some interesting story to tell, we often entertain ourselves sometimes if we're having a community dinner or some holiday event and you're sitting at a table with people you don't know that well. You say, how did you find the spiritual path? If they're disciples of Master, you say, how did you come to be a disciple? Who first gave you the autobiography of a yogi? Here we go again, a moment. Because everybody has a love story. It's the same thing sometimes when married couples are together, you say, oh, how did you meet your wife? How did you meet your husband? What was your first thought? When did you realize you were going to spend your life together? Because we all have that romantic streak. Even if we're somewhat matter of fact, there's always a piece of it that says, we want to hear the story about how love enters our life and how we find the courage to embrace it. It's interesting, in Master's guidelines for marriage, which are really quite impersonal for the most part, he says, remember the days of your courtship and every so often talk about them. Talk about, in other words, how you met, how you fell in love, how you decided to get married, because I think he's also wanting to not have you fall into a rut of lack of appreciation, which very often happens in marriage. You go back to that first blush of romance. But how much more profound that is when what we're really talking about is a divine romance. Master, who can also be quite impersonal about human love. There's a famous, because we often laugh and repeat it to one another over the years, he talks about how the lovers pledge to each other their eternal loyalty and love and promise one another, and the moon laughs and the bleached bones, just lie rotting in the ground, and where is their promise then? But of course, in truth, our relationships last from life to life, but not in that form, not in that, because we don't have the capacity to love in that way, not yet. We have the capacity to aspire to it. But only the masters have the capacity to love us like that. And this beautiful song, which was written by one of Master's disciples, there is no other love like the Master's love for me. It's kind of an odd song in a sense, because we tend to think in terms of how we can give. But there's also an example that we're trying to meet, which is to realize what it is, what the gift is that we're being offered. Swamiji says when he was a young disciple, he remembers sitting in Master's presence. And he was praying. He said, Master, teach me to love you as much as you love me. And he never said it out loud, but Master knew his thoughts. And Master turned to him after a moment and said, how can the little cup expect to hold the whole ocean? Meaning first you have to expand your consciousness, and then the kind of love can flow through you. Now, the reason we sing this song, and the reason this song is so beautiful, the reason the devotee wrote it, there is no other love like the Master's love for me. Because a great deal of the spiritual path is making ourselves confident in the fact that we are beloved. Because the only thing that holds us back from that experience of infinity is our own thought that we're separate from it. There's a story that Swamiji wrote called The Land of Golden Sunshine. It's a very sweet story. We acted it out one year. It was beautiful. And it's about this girl, and it's an allegory. She's a simple girl, and she works in a factory sewing buttons on shirts. And it's a very cold climate, and the cold winter comes, and they have to, hunker down for this onslaught of winter. And this girl has this inner longing for happiness. And because of that, she's visited by the golden sun man, who's golden light. And when he comes to her in her cold and solitary little room, she's uplifted in a way that she's never been before, but in a way still that's familiar to her. It's not as if she's taken to someplace she doesn't know. It's like she's awakened to something that was always just dimly in the background but never fully grasped. And the whole story, which is told in beautiful poetry, and you can buy a copy of it in our store back here, the Sun Man comes 3 times. And he's actually coming to take her out of that cold city and take her off and to merge into this beautiful light that is his nature. And she, when he first comes, instinctively she falls to her knees in adoration. And the story is how the light of his consciousness begins to expand until it touches her being. And twice when that happens, as soon as that light begins to come into her, she has this sudden thought, but who am I to go into his light? And she pulls back like this. And then she sees, just almost imperceptibly, a look of sadness comes over his face. And he withdraws from her. And twice that happens. And then she begins to realize, that it's she who is driving him away. That he would give her the very light that is him, but she doesn't feel worthy of having it. So she goes deep within herself and realizes that everything about him is what she wants. And if that light is his nature, then that light also belongs to her. And so the 3rd time he comes and the light begins to touch her, instead of closing like that, she opens herself all the more to it, because after all, this is the one she loves. And if he chooses to love her completely, why would she close herself to that? And then, as the story happens, she just disappears. She goes away with him and is never heard from again. Such a beautiful story. When Swami Kriyananda invited us to take initiation into sannyas, to become swamis ourselves, I know we shared this with some of you. All the decades that we've been part of Ananda, the word Swami has only meant this one person, even though Swami itself is a title, and it means one who is complete in himself. It's a name that means teacher. And there was this desire on the part of those of us who asked for this to step into that reality, but there's also this natural inhibition, because after all, that's who he is. And we've always held him in such great esteem. To actually step into his reality, the natural thought was, how could we possibly do that? Even though there's thousands and thousands of swamis in India, to us the word has always been singular. Then I thought of that story of Lisa, and I realized that we don't serve the divine cause by refusing to see ourselves as the divine sees us. And with great eagerness, I thought, just like Lisa, if that's what you have, that's what I want. And if I'm going to have your very name, that's what I want. And for me, it was particularly sweet, for just very personally. The first time I saw Swami Kriyananda in November 1969, the first thought that I had before he even spoke was that he had what I wanted. He had the consciousness that I'd never seen it manifested, and I wanted it. And almost 40 years to the day, he initiated us, including me, as the Swami. And I thought, well, that's what he had that I wanted. Not the title, but the dedication, the determination, the commitment to saying, I know my ego tries to tell me that, I have too many things to learn. I have too many responsibilities. I have too many reasons why I just can't go quite that far. And even if I wanted to, I'm obviously not good enough. I don't meditate well enough, and I'm not always cheerful, and when people say unkind things to me, I get sad about it, and boy, was I mad yesterday, and you can make the list, fill in the blanks. and oh, I still long for this, and I still desire that, and all these different reasons. But what happens is that an almost imperceptible look of sadness crosses the Master's face, because he's ready to pour the whole thing into us, but we're just holding this tiny little cup. And so the whole art of being a devotee is really just to say, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference, because God's grace, you see, can transcend everything. We don't really, in the end, really make ourselves better. We just become so full of grace that all of our dark spots are just wiped out by the light. It's really as simple as that. No matter how long a room is dark, it can be, as they say, dark for thousands of years. But as soon as the light comes into it, the dark vanishes as if it were never there. Because all that dark is the absence of light. It doesn't have a reality on its own that can actually fight the light. It's just the absence of light. And as soon as light enters, as if it never were. Isn't that a marvelous thing to contemplate? And so it is, with our many incarnations. This is how Swamiji put it when he said it that one time. He said, when you finally step into that realm of bliss, you look back and you realize that none of it ever happened. That all that intense drama, all those moments, all that personal anguish, it never happened. That's why the saints never think that this is a bum deal. Because they look and they realize that it was all just a misunderstanding. When you have a misunderstanding with someone and it's finally straightened out, you realize it was just a misunderstanding. You never really disliked me. I never really disliked you. You never really meant to hurt me. It was just a misunderstanding between us. It was a delusion. So we have this delusion of this intense separateness and all the things that happen. I was relating to a friend recently who's not not her own children, but her nephew finds himself in great difficulty, and he's near death, and self-inflicted near death now. It's just terrible, absolutely terrible. And I was talking to another friend, and everything was going fine, and then there was this difficulty, and the husband that one loved, and then he falls out of love with you. And the only comfort really in all of this, because otherwise it's just too painful to bear, but the only comfort in this is that it drives us deeper and deeper to seek a love that will never disappoint. We base our self-confidence on certain personal conditions, and then those conditions shift for reasons that we don't even understand. And the only compensation is that it drives us to seek a deeper and deeper level of self-definition. And so we always have to ask ourselves, is it really such a bad thing when who I thought I was gets altered by God's circumstance? But in the midst of this, through all of this, in the Festival of Light, we have this little passage. All that we thought was light was darkness. Who are we in reality? For what end were we made? In other words, what is this experience of life, and why am I here? And then the next line is, ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. And this is the clarion call, that the call to Zion, that somehow or another in all of this clutter and confusion and noise of this world, the whisper from eternity got through. Paramhansa Yogananda was sent to the West. He was sent by Jesus Christ and by Babaji to give again to this world, to this part of this world, a deeper, more profound understanding of what spiritual life is. This country, where Master came first and to spread it from here to the whole world, is such a profoundly spiritual, open-hearted, good country. But how confused we've become. For what end were we made? Everything we've put our faith in, what is it really for? So Yogananda comes. He's sent by this. We pray, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, Paramhansa Yogananda. And what we're really talking is this divine force, starting with the avatar who's been gone for a long time. Krishna's been gone for a long time, but not, their physical bodies have been gone, but their power and their presence has never left us. Even now, great souls are elevated by devotion to those souls, but that force, that even though we turn away, they never turn away from us. Jesus, watching the West, says they're ready again. Babaji, watching the East, says it's time to unite East and West. So this tremendous force comes through and finally comes in this person of Paramhansa Yogananda. Swamiji writes about him and says, above all, it was his eyes and his smile. He said, when you looked into those eyes, he said, you were looking into infinity. And he said there was no hint in those eyes of personal motive or personal feeling. Personal in the sense of self-concerned. They were just simply a window onto infinity. And then Swami talks about just the pure sweetness of that smile when it comes. We've seen it sometimes in the films, just little bits of film just breaking out in that smile. And he just walked into America and just began, I feel it often just like this pulse of energy. Just right from the Om. There's all this other noise going on, and it was as if his presence was and is just this constant toning of the Om vibration. And we run here and there looking for the note, trying to sort of sing our little part, and he's just constantly Oming like that. And finally, it's just because it's always there for those who have the good karma to hear it. It's just suddenly we catch it. Somebody gives us the autobiography of a yogi. We meet another disciple of Master. We come to a meditation class. Just something happens, and it's like that Om just burrows through the noise of our crazy minds. And then once it's there, we can never get rid of it. Because everything else sounds slightly dissonant unless it's in harmony with that sound. And you see, that, in the simplest words, is what it is to have a guru. That's the role that Yogananda plays on this planet. He has the attuned note, and that attuned note is just simply the direct connection. And we move in and out, we oscillate in and out. Just moving back and forth. When we have these little bells, these little kirtals that we play, sometimes the kirtals themselves are not well made, and you hit the two kirtals together and they don't match each other, and they go wow, 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 and you play them with the chants, and behind the chants goes wow, wow, it's horrible. And then every so often you get a pair and you hit them together and they're perfectly tuned, right? And so Master's consciousness is always toning the Om. And we wom, 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 in and out of it, and then every so often. But you see, what it does is it makes it impossible to stray. That's just the most wonderful thing. When I found this spiritual path, when I found first Swami Kriyananda and through him Yogananda, I felt like finally I have a point of reference, an eternal point of reference. And even if I go really far away, I can never get completely lost, because always that sound is there. And within oneself you feel that dissonance. You begin to wonder, what's wrong? I'm out of tune. And the masters just do that. They just send that out. And as we become more and more sensitive, we begin to seek and seek and seek and seek until we find. And the Master, who's always just been standing there, smiling, waiting for us to come. And I will wait, the Master says, I will wait for all eternity if necessary. Because what else do they have to do? It's all they are. Because there is no other love like the Master's love for me. And then our reality is to become as big as the ocean so that we can experience that love in its entirety and then become like they are, passing it on to all.